Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
TB, that's me. I am your king. I am your MC for another ride here with the Tennessee Stud. It is hard to believe as the story continues. Today, we're going to take you back to Memphis. Today, we're going to visit with the king. I'm talking about the king of rock and roll. And I'm talking about the king of swing. I'm talking 93 years and 4 generations. I'm talking 6'9", 265 pounds. I'm talking about the largest and oldest wrestling family. I'm talking about whether you're an old school or a new school, old or new, we're here for you. I'm talking about the stud. Ron Fuller, in your born days, have you ever had an intro like that? I think I hit that one pretty well. What do you think?
Hot dog, man. I don't know if I can follow that, Tony. I mean, you are cranked today. I'm loving it. I got my horse saddled up, but now I'm going to put the spurs to him, man. I'm going to have to catch up to you. Sounds like you are really ready to roll.
Well, here's the bottom line. You know, we're in the Southland here. I'm coming from the epicenter of rasslin history. We're talking about Knoxville, Tennessee, home of the Vols. It's football season. I'm pumped about our Southeastern Sunday program that I've got, and then my post-game offerings. You know, Ron, there's just a certain punch you get when it's football season, but yet our numbers on the Studcast continue, and I mean continue to grow. In fact, Ron, before we get started, can I say thank you to our friends over at Wrestling Classics, a great old school wrestling board. They've really been talking up the Studcast, man. They love you. They love your storytelling. They're putting you over.
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's happening it's happening all over the world. We're pulling numbers now from outside the United States that are just significant. I mean, it's blowing me away. 10% of our audience is living in Australia and England and Sweden. We have a tremendous audience growing in Sweden. I don't even know how they speak English there. I'm surprised that anyone in Sweden would listen to us, but they're becoming a big audience of ours. We're pulling numbers now, Tony. We're able to see them for the first time, and it's astounding what's going on here. People are just really into it. I'm humbled by it. It's amazing. I never thought we'd get this type of reaction, and certainly not this soon. We're in the episode, we're early in these episodes here. We're, I guess, at number 12 today. It's really amazing what's happening. So many different outlets. We've been able to get on so many programs. We've been on Brian Last 605. We have a segment on every one or every other program of Jim Cornette's The Stud Story. We tell a story on there every other episode for him. We're just on radio stations. I'm doing radio broadcasts 2-3 a day. I did one last week from Minnesota, station in Minnesota, 20 miles south of the Canadian border. I mean, we're talking wrestling to the world. It's really amazing. Never thought that we would get to this point, but I think there's people. I see comments. I saw one today from someone that says, I get up in the morning and I find your Studcast has moved to Saturday morning, a drop at Saturday morning. And he says, I'm not even going to sleep on Friday night. I'm going to stay up so I can be the first one to get on there and listen to it. Great comments from everywhere across the country. 1,000%. The guy in Minnesota talked to me. He says, Ron, I love your program. So do all our listeners. He goes, you're batting 1,000%. I've never seen a negative comment anywhere on your Facebook or anywhere else. It's pretty phenomenal, Tony. I think we're on to something here that people are really enjoying. We're laying out history, not just my family's history. We're laying out wrestling history. The gentleman from Minnesota is an example. We talked 30 minutes to Vern Gagne. He says, how do you know Vern Gagne? I said, I know them all. I told him my friendship with Vern and having made trips into Minnesota and working in Denver for him and things like that. So, we're just really getting some traction here. And I just want to thank all these thousands and thousands. Podcast numbers are growing. The Studcast numbers are just expanding to levels that I thought we wouldn't reach until the first year in. We're reaching them in 10 weeks, 11 weeks, 12 weeks. It's just phenomenal what's happening. I'm just very happy about it. And I certainly want all these fans out there that are listening to this to know that I'm just humbled by it, and I'm doing the best I can to crank it out for you every week. And today, I think we got a great one for him, Tony.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that. When you start evoking Memphis and the King, and then you take us back to the farm a little bit, and the storytelling that you bring, just a certain style that you have about the way you present these terrific tales. So let's go back to Memphis. We're going to be in the early 60s here. And this is some white-hot stuff here, Stud.
Yeah, it is. Memphis is a white-hot wrestling town. It has been in the past. It had some bad times in the early 50s and into the latter part of the 50s, and Dad goes there. We moved there in 1959, early 59. Dad establishes himself very quickly. He brings his crew, I call them his crew, to Memphis. His same wrestlers that he developed the territory along the Gulf Coast with that was extremely successful, ending up drawing 40,000 people to one event. Just has rocked the world down there along the Gulf Coast. And now he loses his ambition. He has accomplished his goals. He has sold out every city along the Gulf Coast and drawn, like I said, 40,000 people for one event only. Just tremendous numbers. And he wants to take that torch. I think I described it this way a couple of weeks ago. I think him and Roy were both carriers of that wrestling torch that lights those fans up. And now he's going to take that torch to Memphis, where things are bad, and they've been bad for a couple of years now. And he's going to stick that torch to the city of Memphis, and he's going to turn that city into wrestling fire. It's going to become one of the best wrestling cities in America, and it's not going to just be that way when Dad is there. Even when we leave, it never dies. The flame never goes out in Memphis. It is a wrestling mecca. It's huge, becomes huge, but he's the foundation for it. And the decisions he makes early on to bring in Lance Russell as a television commentator, to change the wrestling program to live, to do it for 90 minutes rather than a normal 60-minute program like everybody else in the country's doing. He makes these great decisions. His marketing is just through the roof. Wrestling, King of Sports, is seen everywhere in Memphis. It's on every taxi cab. It's on every bus. It's on every billboard. It's everywhere you look. It's the talk of the town. We talked last week. He's in Ellis Auditorium, a 10,000-seat arena. He's doing better than Elvis. You had a figure last week that shocked me. It was amazing that Elvis, on 1 week, in the same week, Elvis drew 5,600 people in Ellis Auditorium in his hometown, and wrestling sold out at 10,000, almost doubled Elvis's crowd. It's just a rocking sport all of a sudden. He just takes it and lights that torch up, and all of a sudden the fans are flocking to wrestling. That's all they want to see. That's all they want to talk about. So since we mentioned Elvis, I think that's a great place for us to start today. Elvis is a great story for me and my family. Elvis was a wrestling fan like everybody else in Memphis, it seems, back in the early 60s, in 1960 in particular. Elvis used to come to the matches, and I was explaining the structure of Ellis Auditorium. It had 8,000 people on one side. It had a stage with a giant concrete curtain that dropped down, and another 2,000 people on the other side of the building. And when the events were large enough, they had to do it all the time for wrestling because it became so big, they knew they were going to sell out both sides. So they would sell out one side, maybe 8,000 people on one side. At 8 o'clock, they rang the bell, and the first thing that happened is that giant curtain would rise slowly, and the people on one side of the building would get their first look at the people sitting on the other side. They would start to cheer back and forth at one another and with one another. It set such a fabulous tone for the evening, and it had everybody inspired. They were all just on the edges of their seat, and the bell hadn't rung to have the first match. And a lot of times, standing back there in the shadows of that stage was Elvis Presley as a young guy. Now, he's in his early years. This is 1959, 1960. He has become a star. He's about, I guess, to start doing his movies. He's into that stage. He's become a monster star, and he's a huge fan. He's a fan of Sputnik Monroe. He's a fan of Billy Wicks. He's a fan of a tremendous group of wrestlers, and he's there every Monday night when he can, when he's in the town. And my dad has a great personal relationship with him. He knows Dad runs the company. Dad's not wrestling at this point. He's just the promoter, and he gets Elvis in every night. Once the matches are about to start, Elvis's limo pulled up with his entourage. He had a group of bodyguards and a group of people with him all the time. They hurry out of that limo. I saw the routine as a kid myself, through the back door of the Ellis Auditorium, onto the stage, and he would stand there and watch those matches all night. The main event, he would watch it to the very end. The bell would ring, and as they say in the old music industry, it became a famous line, Elvis would leave the building. And I mean, he'd be the first one out the back door, his entourage, and he's gone. People never realized that Elvis Presley was standing back in those shadows of that stage watching what was going on. Pretty darn amazing that he came almost every Monday night. We lived on a big farm. Dad's doing very well at this point. Obviously, things are selling out, not just Memphis, but all the surrounding towns that he ran. And a lot of them were in Arkansas, Little Rock, and some of the other towns in Arkansas, places in Mississippi. He did not run a big, expansive territory like Roy's running. Roy's still in Nashville. Roy's operating everything practically in 12 states. But there's this little cone kind of in the southeastern part, the southwestern part of his territory called Memphis. And somehow Dad has managed to slide in there, and Dad bought Memphis from a guy named Les Wolf, who was in there and was getting his talent from Roy. When Dad came and bought Les Wolf out, then Dad started operating, and he brought his own talent. He had no need for Roy's talent. Now, he had for years worked with Roy along the Gulf Coast. He ran that company, did a great job of it, but Roy got 10% of everything that happened there, and Dad had his own talent. So Dad felt like if he's going to take his own people, he's going to buy the town, then he deserved to be able to run it himself. So my dad's operating it. Roy and Nick Goulis are in Nashville, and they're watching what's going on in Memphis. Their territory's doing great. Every territory in the country is doing great. We're in the late 50s, early 60s. Television is just driving the machine. It is packing houses everywhere. It's making huge money for television stations because sometimes their biggest audience of the entire day is wrestling. It's doing these magnificent and huge numbers. So they're so happy with wrestling programming that they're pushing it and they're promoting it themselves by running ads, running promotional spots that are cut by wrestlers that say, hey, watch us every Saturday, whatever the time slot is. So Business around the country is booming, but in particular, Memphis is on fire. Roy is keeping an eye on it, and Dad's doing very well. We move into a home. We're used to living on a farm in Alabama. We live in a small house. Dad does very well. We buy a farm. It's almost in downtown Memphis. It's really close to the rest of the city. It's about a 200-acre farm. It's got a lake. It's got a huge barn on it. Dad's got a lot of horses. He really gets into the horse business. He has a lot of horses, and he buys a home that's just, when I think back upon it, I don't know how many square feet it was, but I'm going to guess it was 15,000 square feet. It had a 40 by 60 living room, and the beams were from California. They were California redwood beams. It was built with all you could see the interior of the roof. It was opened area, big high ceilings, beautiful, beautiful home. Had a bomb shelter in the basement where you actually stored food and things. It's back in the days when you didn't know what was going to happen between Russia and the United States, and people were building these bomb shelters. This house had one. It was so big in the dining room, they had a button under the table that you put your foot on and they mashed it, and it rang for the people in the kitchen to bring food or to come and check on you in the dining room. Monster house. We're living big time. And Elvis Presley is not just a fan of wrestling, he's a fan of Dad's. And he wants to find out more about wrestling. In our barn, we probably have 30 horses, and we have in the middle of the barn, no one else in the country has this, I'm sure, is a wrestling ring. It stays there all the time. And Dad tells Elvis that, hey, look, are you interested in finding out more about the business? And Elvis says, yes, sir. Elvis was a tremendous, very nice, just quiet and very respectable person. An old good Southern boy. And Elvis says, yes, sir, I would like to come and see what wrestling's all about. You can teach me some things. So Elvis used to show up sometimes. He'd come in his limo. He'd bring several other guys with him. They all wanted to learn a little bit. Dad would spend some time. He would just shoot with them. He didn't do there was no working. He wasn't trying to teach them how to wrestle or how to be wrestlers. He just wanted to show Elvis some of what wrestling was really all about. And Dad had a lot of knowledge about that shooting stuff, and Elvis loved it. Elvis was I was a kid, 12 years old. I remember seeing him standing in the background watching. Never went to talk to him, didn't feel like it was appropriate. I was scared of Elvis. Elvis was a monster star, and I was just standing there and watching Rob as well. We were just in awe of Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley's at our house. It's like, what in the heck? Who has that happen to him? So it was a fabulous time for us. And Elvis came for probably 6 months, 8 months, fairly regularly. Whenever he was in Memphis, he would come and visit us. He would spend some time in the ring. He really was a great athlete. He had great body. He had good muscle tone. He was a performer. And he took some of that and incorporated it into his act. And people that watch him, he would do the karate stuff. And a lot of that came from his little bit of wrestling training that he had with my dad. He was a great individual. Everybody in the world, maybe one of the most famous people that ever lived on the face of the earth, and admired by almost everybody, and for good reason. He deserved it.
Yeah, I want people to stop and think about what you're saying here. Just put this in perspective, because it can get lost in your storytelling and how excited you are as you tell the story, and for good reason. Here's the king of rock and roll. We're about 5 or 6 years into, and I know Brian with our Arcadian Vanguard family loves his rock and roll, and I do too. We're about 5 or 6 years into the formation of rock and roll. Elvis, who breaks out of Memphis, all those great tunes, and you're sitting there in the formative years. You're in the seat of all this. Your dad has the promotion that has Elvis's attention, and you just put a young Aaron Elvis Presley in your father's barn, and you're sitting there telling me that as a 10 to 12-year-old kid, at whatever age you are, you're sitting there looking at him and you're going, I can't even go up and talk to him. I mean, I just can't even. It's just so hard for me to comprehend seeing that, stud. You've lived 5 lifetimes, man. I mean, you've seen so many things, but that's got to be one of the more surreal chapters as you look back on your life, the relationship of Elvis Presley and your father, as you recount this right now. It's got to be just surreal to think about that. If you think about how loved Elvis Presley is through time, and these people that still make the Mecca down to, or the pilgrimage rather, down to the Mecca, that is Graceland. If you think about all that and just his place in rock and roll, and he was right there with you guys when this boom started to happen in Memphis.
Yes, sir. It is truly amazing. And I never lost touch with the fact that, Tony, what's really amazing is wrestling has such a broad appeal to so many different people, especially athletes and the athletic types. I met so many really, really famous people as a young kid, 8, 10, 12 years old. Rocky Marciano, Joe Louis, boxing world champions that were fabulous, fabulous names. They've been in my home. I've sat and had dinner with Rocky Marciano. I mean, it's really amazing the people that I met as a young kid because of my dad and because of the business that he was in. Elvis is just, he's through the roof. He's top, the cream of the crop. He's the biggest name, probably that I ever was around. I've met in my lifetime Ronald Reagan as an example. I flew on a flight with Ronald Reagan in California. I've met tremendous personalities during the course of, but the episode with Elvis and those years in Memphis with Elvis coming and hanging out at the house and actually seeing him in the ring, it was, unforgettable. It was a real bonus for me as a young kid. I think it helped me to develop into who I become. And it's important, I think, to put it in perspective. And I think you just did in a way. It's to me, I'm just telling the story, but the story is pretty magnificent. It's pretty amazing that you're talking about a guy like Elvis.
We're talking about 5 years into the formation of rock and roll. We're talking about something that would lead to, as we look back through time, the British invasion, the Beatles and the Stones, and all the seminal, terrific music that was made, and all that classic country stuff that was coming out of that same area of the country. And you guys happened to move there. And it's just incredible to think back to it. Let me ask you this. 2 things about Elvis I want to ask you. First of all, did your dad smarten him up to the business? Did he needed to be smartened up? That's the first one. And then who was Elvis's favorite wrestler? Who was his guy? Can I guess and say that it was Sputnik Monroe due to Elvis's relationship with the black community and how he had such a tremendous relationship with the blues and with that music? I just want to guess and say it was Sputnik Monroe. Was Elvis smart to this? And then who was his favorite wrestler?
Well, first of all, let's start with the smart. Dad never smartened up me. He never smartened up anybody. Neither did Roy. That's why we're sitting here talking and why this whole conversation and all of these studcasts are evolving from telling the history. No, Dad never smartened him up. That's why I was saying that he would shoot with him. They would go in the ring and Dad would never hurt him, but he would show him holds. And Elvis learned those holds. He was good. He was a great athlete. And he would then take his entourage and Dad would say, here's how you do an inside toe hold as an example, the Fuller leg lock. Before it became the Fuller leg lock, nobody had ever seen it. And he would show Elvis the simple way to do it. And then Elvis would say, get in here, so-and-so, get in here. He would have them come in the ring and he would do it to them and he would hurt them. He would pull them and they would scream and he would laugh. He was like, he enjoyed it. He was like, wow, this is great. I'm learning something good. So it was a great experience for Elvis. It was a great experience for me to watch that as a kid and see how Dad related to Elvis and how Elvis related to wrestling. And you're right, his favorite star in Memphis was Sputnik Monroe. Sputnik Monroe was everybody's favorite star in Memphis. Even the people that hated him still loved him. They admired Sputnik and what Sputnik did. He had a charisma to him that few wrestlers ever had that I remember. And he was a huge star. He was a star to Elvis as well, just like everybody else in Memphis.
The brilliance of that whole Sputnik angle, as you were talking about last week, and as he developed his character and who he became, was that it all evolved during the time of those racial tensions in the early 60s. And if you look back on it, you couldn't have had a perfect recipe for a guy that was a tweener like he was. He was a kind of a heel who was a face. and you couldn't have created a better situation for tension.
He never again, Sputnik spent a lot of years around us. Rob and I grew up with him. He treated us like we were his sons. He was wonderful to us, and we loved Sputnik. He was a great person, but he never reached that point ever again in his career. He topped out right there in Memphis. He captivated that crowd. And like you said, he was both heel and babyface. He was everything to Memphis wrestling. He built Memphis probably more than any other person. If you look back on the history of that city, no wrestler was ever over to the extent that Sputnik was. And he rocked it there. He really made Memphis what Memphis became. And after we left, a year later, we're gone from there. That city never dies. That fire lit by Dad and Sputnik and that first crew in the 1959s, 60s just left that city as one of the best wrestling cities there will ever be on the planet. Really great city. Let's slide on. We were all talking about this barn. This barn has a lot of history for me. It's a big barn. It's a beautiful farm, like I was talking about. Dad has no farm for us to work on. Now, he took us in the Loxley years and we lived in Mobile. We worked every day. I mean, he wanted us to grow up working. He didn't want us to be laying around watching TV. In fact, if we ever got caught watching television, he would come in the house. He would say, "Get your clothes on, get your work clothes on. We're out of here." He would take us, he would put us in the barn shoveling crap, whatever it might be. We cleaned out the stalls. You're going to work. So he kept us working. So he buys this farm again because I'm firmly convinced it's to keep me and Rob from being lazy boys. So he buys horses now. He gets in this horse kick. He starts buying horses, expensive horses, some of them. They're quarter horses, beautiful horses, smart, intelligent, great animals. And we have to go every morning. We get up at daylight, sometimes before daylight in the winter. Memphis is cold in the winter. We get up in the winter and we go sit in a corn bin and shuck corn for 40, 50 horses every morning. 500, 700 ears of corn we shuck every morning. We got to take blankets off of horses. We've got to take them out and water them. We have to feed them. We have to get all that done. We go into the house just enough time, grab a quick breakfast, get on our other clothes, school clothes, and we're off to school. So our lives, when we come home in the afternoon, it's the same routine. It's time to feed again. Now you put the blankets on. You go through that process with 30, 40 horses. It's a long, hard grind. And he's happy with that. He's got us busting our butts. He has us doing what he wants us to do. He wants us not to be lazy boys. And we're now 11, 12 years old. Sometimes we get into these arguments like two brothers will. I think this may be the beginning. People go, well, why is it you and Rob have these problems? And I believe it all starts right in this time frame. We're young boys. He's forcing us to work every day. We go in to shuck the corn in the morning, and I'm trying to get it done, and Rob's off playing with the horses. He's just doing what he wants. I say, hey, come on in here, man. We've got to shuck all this. Oh, you can do it. Just go ahead. I'm going to play with this horse over here. So we start having these little altercations back and forth where we fuss more. We don't get along very well. Well, I'll give you one example. We had some cows and we put them out in the pasture. There was probably a 10-acre piece of pasture, and we would have to put them out in the mornings and get them back before we could go to school sometimes. So Rob would be playing out there, and I'd be trying to herd them out of the grass. Those were nice green oats that were good in the wintertime. They didn't want to get out of there. You had to really herd them out of there, and Rob would be playing. I'd be trying to get it done. I remember one time chasing him down, just like in the movies. He's on his horse, I'm on mine. I run him down, dive off on top of him. We both go falling off the horse onto the ground, rolling around and fighting. It's like a movie. We're almost in a movie, and we started to have these little altercations in which it made it difficult for us to get along. One altercation we had 2 stud horses, and a bunch of the rest of them were mares. And these 2 stud horses, you didn't take these studs out to water them in a trough at the same time. So I take one out. I take a little piece of rope that you put on a bale of hay. I grab it. He's very tame, very smart horse. I put it around his neck. I take him out to a watering trough. It's so cold that he can't drink it because the ice is 4 inches thick on the trough. So I have to break the ice. He drinks the water. While we're out there, Rob's not paying any attention. He brings the second stud horse out. The 2 horses start to get into it, and the one that I'm holding on to runs through the fence and drags me through the fence with him, and then runs through a cornfield. I'm hung where my arm is caught up into the rope, and he's dragging me. He's running between the rows of corn, but he's dragging me down a row of corn. Stalks are hitting me in the face. He stretches out my shoulder. I go to the hospital, and I get my first cortisone shot, which I never forgot what a cortisone shot felt like after that. I'm 12 years old, and they popped me with that cortisone, and I said right then, I don't ever want none of those anymore. I found out as a wrestler, you're going to get a, and that's going to be the one thing that's going to help you to survive the sport that you're in is cortisone. So I get my first cortisone shot. We're having trouble, Rob and I, over lots of things. It's pretty hard for Dad and Mom because we're 2 young boys. And like brothers are, I think in a lot of families, we're not getting along well. It's making it difficult for them, especially my mom. She had a real hard time handling it. We do a lot of work on the farm. We're basically busy all the time. And as we're going along here, business is still cranked. Dad builds up to one of his big events, like he did in Mobile that drew 40,000. He wants to have a Cadillac tournament. He wants to give away a Cadillac. And when he does that, it turns out that he can't, the Ellis Auditorium is too small. He wants to go to the biggest venue in Memphis. And at that point, it's a baseball stadium. He takes his Cadillac Tournament finals to a baseball stadium in Memphis. It's down on, I can't remember the name of the street. I wish I could. It's a major thoroughfare through Memphis. It's one of the first 4-lane streets in Memphis, and there's a baseball stadium there. I'm not sure about the size nor the name because I'm 12 years old. I don't remember the particulars, but I remember it's one of the times I got to go see a match. Lots of times Rob and I didn't get to go, but he took us that night and we watched. Sputnik Monroe wrestled Billy Wicks for a brand new Cadillac. And the Cadillac was driven out. They opened up a gate in center field of the stadium, drove the Cadillac out onto center field, and left it sitting there during the night so that people could see it. And then you have your main event. And I remember the match was a phenomenal match. I remember Billy Wicks was bleeding pretty badly because he got hard weighed over both eyes during the match. Sputnik busted both his eyes. Billy Wicks won the car, and Billy Wicks, bleeding down to his shoes, leaves the ring and he walks out to center field, opens that Cadillac door, the keys are in it, and he sits down in the car. Now, I'm a big boy. I'm a 12-year-old boy. I'm sitting in the stands watching this, and all the fans start to come out onto the field. The stands empty onto the field. There's probably 30,000 people. I don't know the number. I never heard the number, but it's a tremendous crowd. There's thousands of people on the field during the event. Now all the stands empty on the field as well. They open the center field gate and they're going to drive the car. The idea, I think, was that he's going to get in the car and drive it out of the stadium and leave. And what happens is so phenomenal. As a kid, I'll never forget the sight. They swarmed this car, and he's in it. He can't drive it because there's too many people around it, and they pick him up in that Cadillac, the crowd, and carry that car out that gate in the center field and set him down in the street out there. And he drives his car off and goes home, bleeds all over it. I don't know how he kept from destroying it.
Stud, we're about out of time here in terms of this segment, but it's a great story you tell. Was it Crump Stadium that you're talking about? Does that ring a bell to you?
That might be it. It was a baseball stadium.
Crump Stadium was built in 1934, and that is where the history books say that match took place. As I look it up online as you're discussing this, Crump Stadium in 1939 was enlarged to hold 25,000 spectators. The Delta Bowl used to be played there. 1947, the Arkansas-Texas football game was played there. Annual Ole Miss-Tennessee game was played there until the 60s. Memphis State, now Memphis University, used to play their games there until the completion of Memorial Stadium, which became the Liberty Bowl. So that's right in that sweet spot. And you're right on the money, the way you're describing that. That would have been the capacity, right around the capacity of that stadium. And you can just picture that, how much they love this guy, that they're actually carrying his car after he won the match. I mean, I wish there was some footage that existed of that. That's incredible.
Oh, yes. I'd give anything. If someone had recorded that, back in those days, you weren't shooting anything. They didn't have a means of recording. They could have done the old millimeter films or whatever. But it was, as a young kid, it stuck with me forever. And I could never get that picture out of my mind of those thousands of people. And literally thousands of people went through that gate with him, those that carried the cars, and then they just kept going out into the street. They shut down that street, and there was a major thoroughfare in Memphis. I don't remember the name of the street, but they honestly closed it down. The police just shut it down. There was so many people out in the street. A phenomenal thing. What it was to me, it was the end of a great era for Memphis wrestling, because what was about to take place from that point on is a sad, sad story. It's a family fight in a way. We'll maybe get into that if we're pretty close to where we need to be today. Not covered what I was hoping we could cover today, but I want to tell this story, Tony. I don't want to leave anything out. I don't want to miss anything. I don't want to try to go fast. I just want to be complete with it. I want people to get a feel for the tremendous, tremendous love of the sport in Memphis. Like I was saying a couple of weeks ago, he lit the torch. Wherever he went, he lit that torch, and those fans went nuts for it. They loved it. They'll never forget it. And I was a young kid. I never forgot it. That's one of the scenes that sticks in my mind forever. People carrying that car. It was amazing. We're going to do questions, whatever we're going to do. Next week, we'll go back and we'll talk about the demise of Memphis, the demise, the end of my dad's era in Memphis. It's not the demise of Memphis, because Memphis never dies. Memphis' torch is lit. They're going to be a huge wrestling city forever. It's just the end of my dad's era running that city.
And when we come back after this quick timeout, you're going to ask the stud. As we continue on the other side, it is Studcast 12. As we just talked about the king, you just met the king. And on the other side, you get to ask the stud as we continue with more after this.
This is Studcast number 12, featuring stud stories as told by the legendary Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud, and hosted by Tony Basilio. This Studcast will continue in a moment. You are back, seated ringside on this edition of the Ron Fuller Studcast.
Can you believe we're back with you? And can you believe it's time for questions? Can you believe how the stud performed flawlessly in our last segment? Stud, the pressure's on you now, as it is time to play Ask the Stud. And if folks would like to ask the stud, how do they ask the stud?
Well, if they're on Facebook, my Facebook page is Ron Fuller Welch. If you friend me on Facebook, you want to ask me a question, I'm actually getting questions from other avenues now, but I still like to take these people that are Facebook friends at Ron Fuller Welch. Ask me your question. I'm going to do 3 per episode, basically. And if you win, I'm going to send you an autograph picture. I've sent out several of them already. And I get these great thank yous from the people that get them, and they're very excited about it. I heard my name, and your question, the way you answered it. It's one of my favorite segments. I really enjoy this. It's no pressure for me. It's really a thrill for me to answer these fans' questions. And I'm honestly just blown away by how good the questions are. That we have such knowledgeable wrestling fans in this country. They know their stuff, and I look forward to this segment. Let's just hit her, man. Let's see what we got today.
I love this segment too, Stud, for two reasons. One, we celebrate wrestling here. And as we said, McMahon can try, and he's tried to destroy it. He's tried his best to destroy the business. That's one opinion I share with Jim Cornette. I know that you share. But here's the thing. You can't take the love that people have for it, and you can see and sense the love in these questions and the outpouring of folks on the Facebook page at Ron Fuller Welch. And also, while we're at it, on your web page as well, share with the listener where they can find you on the web.
On the web, it's Tennessee Stud. Now, that's spelled TNSTUD, abbreviation for the state of Tennessee, TNSTUD.com. That's the website. Everything rolls from that website, obviously. And there's a lot of things happening with our website here that we're really going to be talking more about in the future here. It's really cranking itself up. Stud Store is in operation. Everything is starting to develop from there. Studcast can be picked up there, as well as we have a little thing we'll talk about after this, to these questions, maybe later on here, about iTunes and getting more exposure. The Studcast has outgrown a website. It's grown into an iTunes product. I'm very proud of that. People can reach us there. So there's a lot of things happening for us. And let's just jump on these questions. I'm really looking forward to see what we got here today.
Also want to thank Brian Last, the great Brian Last with Arcadian Vanguard, as we're now part of his family, and proudly so. Question number 1 comes from Roger O'Neill from Baker, Florida. Could you talk about who were the true brother teams versus the teams who were put together by promoters? True brothers versus work brothers.
What a question. Well, hell, I got to start right off the bat with my brother. There's something about wrestling with a family member. A lot of people in wrestling don't have families. They are the only one. And when you're a family member, I've had great success with Rob. I always love wrestling partners with Rob because you seem to know what the other one is thinking without saying it. And you're there for that person when you need to be there. It's a bond that can't be created from two individuals that don't have the same blood in their body. Jimmy Golan, same bloodline. Jimmy and Rob are a great team. They're not brothers, but they are cousins, first cousins, make a great team. Lester's two sons, Roy Lee and Jackie Welch, wrestled a lot of tag team matches and did great. Were fabulous. I'm just going to name off some of the brother teams that just come to the top of my head that were phenomenal. Ole and Gene Anderson. Great teams. The Steiner brothers, great boys, good wrestling backgrounds, brothers, tight, close to one another, think alike, perform in the ring alike. Their heads are in tune. They don't have to sit and talk about how we're going to attack this team. They just go to the ring, and it just develops for them. It just happens for them. Back in the 60s, mid-60s in Atlanta, there were three brothers named Torres. The Torres brothers were a tremendous team. All three of them were great wrestlers in single matches. But when you put any two of those three together, and sometimes in a six-man tag, you would see all three of those guys together. They were phenomenal together. And the names just go on and on. Brother Dory Jr. and Terry Funk. I mean, can you imagine two world heavyweight champions as brothers wrestling against? I saw those two guys wrestle, Jack Briscoe and Jerry Briscoe in Florida, probably 10 times. Some of the greatest tag team matches I ever saw was those four guys. That brother combination is just phenomenal. It's hard to explain what happens, but fans can sit there in their seat and they won't have a word for it or a description for it, but they'll realize there's something happening here that doesn't happen in the other teams. Now, it doesn't mean that great teams can't be formed from two individuals, because there are a lot of those, and I've wrestled a heck of a lot of those. The Assassins, as an example, great team. Tom Ernesto and Jody Hamilton, not brothers, but by gosh, you would think they were brothers. They're both on the same page all the time. Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens, two absolutely phenomenal wrestlers teamed as one. were just spectacular together. I wrestled against them, Assassins and Bockwinkel and Stevens, and it was an experience to be in the ring with those guys. It was a training for me. I was a young guy both times with both of those two teams, and every time I got in that ring and I left, I learned so much from how these guys handled matches and how they developed a match and how they controlled and where they went with it. And the results were always spectacular. You would leave there and that building would be electric. They were like people had seen something fabulous and fantastic. So that's a great question. A lot of super brother teams. The reason for that is because they do think alike and it's in their blood and they're backing up each other. A little more maybe than you take two single guys and stick them together. There's a lot of great tags that were put together that way. My dad, Buddy Fuller and Ray Gunkel, another great tag team, weren't brothers, but a great tag team combination. So there's ones that work that aren't brothers, but to me, brother combinations are unbeatable.
Great question from Roger O'Neill, Baker, Florida. Further underscores how great tag team wrestling was, the way it was presented, all the psychological possibilities involved in a tag team match, and the way the performers and the guys and the athletes would take you on a ride. Great question. Adam Luce, Quincy, Massachusetts. Did any of your companies ever get offers for a national cable deal in the 1980s? And Stud, before you answer this, there are some folks online who sort of half don't believe. Let me just say that to you. Don't believe your answer to that from a previous Studcast. People find it hard to believe that you were presented with an opportunity. But go ahead and share it because it came up in an earlier Studcast.
Yes, I think we've talked about this briefly, and I did have that opportunity. And it happened when I had Continental Wrestling. It was the biggest company that I was able to develop, and it had exposure in the Middle East big time. We had a company contact me and said, your product, Ron, is just absolutely amazing. You've got Gordon Soley as a commentator. You're doing it in-house television program with 10,000 people in the crowd. Your booking and your quality of talent is through the roof. And they said, we want to take you internationally. We want to take you outside the country. They started selling us in Saudi Arabia and Arab Emirates. We were doing a lot of business with people in the Middle East, doing very well, tremendous audiences, and they were purchasing the show at a tremendous level. We were becoming stars. And this same company then says, Ron, there's an opening. The NBC is actually looking for a wrestling product. This would have been the first time since the 50s that any national television station was looking for wrestling content. And the reason was, Tony, is oddly enough, is because wrestling was kicking butt all over the country. And some of those executives in New York with the major networks were probably running those numbers and going, geez, look at what's happening here in this sport. We need to jump on it as a national program rather than all these regionalized shows. And so they talked to me, this company. They brought me to New York City. I went to New York City and spent 2 days. We sat and discussed it. And they said, Ron, we've got the connections. We think you're the people that need to have this show. And I backed off because I was a member of the National Wrestling Alliance. I felt like if I did that, I would be taking advantage of all those fellow promoters in the country and hurt their product, cause them, they would have to compete against me. It would put them at a disadvantage. And I just didn't feel comfortable because they were my friends. I had respect for them and I did not want to cause them that problem. Well, Vince did not feel that way. Vince, obviously, being up there in that Northeast area, got the same opportunity that I got. I don't know whether he got it before I did or whether he got it after I did, but I end up telling these people that, no, guys, I don't want to do it. I don't want to disrupt what's going on with wrestling in this country. And that's what would have actually happened. It would have disrupted them. I think had I done it, I think if I'd have taken that opportunity, I'd have done it different than Vince. I would have gone to all these promoters, sat down in the National Wrestling Alliance meeting and said, gentlemen, I have a national television opportunity, but I don't want it to benefit me. I want it to benefit all of us. And I would have gone in a different direction. I would not have ever gone to the level of saying, I'm not wrestlers anymore. We're not wrestling. We're entertainers. I would have never gone there with it. I think the sport would be a different sport today. Landscape would be totally different concerning wrestling than what it is now. Had I said, yes, let's take it to them and see if we could have done it. I firmly believe they would have watched my product up there, and they would have said, wow, this guy's got some good stuff.
People find that hard to believe, though, which is okay, right? I mean, it's okay. Here's the thing I know about you. You're not here to BS anybody. Why would you say that?
Well, yeah, everything that comes out of my mouth here is true. I mean, I'm not here to tell anything that isn't true. I think it has it's one word, Tony, that makes the difference between me and Vince: respect. I had tremendous respect for those other guys and what they had sweated and bled and done to do and accomplish, and their rights. In my mind, it was their right to own their territory, their own region, and to not have to compete with someone else. It was a glorious day in wrestling, and we all look back at it now, especially the old timers and a lot of the fans, and go, whatever happened to it? Why did it all go away? And it went away because of greed and disrespect. Someone that says, I don't care about the rest of them. This is an opportunity for me to be the man. And I guess I'm not made like that. I never really wanted to be the man. I just wanted to be one of the men.
I love it. And I think it's a great question. And I'm glad it came up again because, again, people found it hard to believe when you said it the first time. And you tell the exact same thing this time, which leads me to believe that there is tons and tons and tons of truth, 100% truth in what you're saying, and I back you up. Let's go to the third question, and it's from Rodney Minton of Jellicoe, Tennessee, who asks, who was the toughest heel you faced in Southeastern wrestling in Knoxville? Toughest heel, stud.
Boy, we had some great ones, Tony. Jeez, Professor Tanaka, Ronnie Garvin, Bob Orton Jr., the great Malenko. Oh, gosh, it just goes on. Don Carson. The list goes on and on and on of great talent. There was a tremendous amount of talent that went through Knoxville between 74 and 79 that probably very few territories in the country witnessed the talent level we had. But to me, one person really stuck out, and it was because he was probably the best athlete and in the best shape of any guy maybe that ever put on a pair of trunks, and that was the Mongolian Stomper. Stomper was a unique individual. Oh, my gosh. I remember the first time he ever wrestled in Knoxville. It was a tag team match. It was a 2-ring battle royal. The winners of Ring 1 got in the ring with winners of Ring 2, and they had a tag match, and you got a $10,000 prize for winning that tag match. It was the winners of the 2-ring battle royal. It was Mongolian Stomper and my brother, oddly enough, in ring number 1, and I can't remember the two guys in ring 2, but I think they were both heels. So it was Rob. I remember watching the match, and it was Rob in there with a partner that he had never met. It was the Mongolian Stomper's first appearance in Knoxville, and there's two heels on the other team. So Rob's at a distinct disadvantage. The match starts, and Stomper starts the match. He goes across the ring, and he wheels one of the guys over the top rope inside the ring. He throws him into the ropes. He kicks him in the stomach. He kicks him upside the head, and then he goes to the ropes, and he stomps him in the face, and he pins the first guy he gets to. Now, the thing has only lasted 20 seconds. Basically, the tag's over. But he don't stop. He gets off of him, and he goes back and grabs his partner, the guy's partner. He wheels him over the top rope. He throws him in, kicks him in the belly, stomps him in the side of the face, and goes to the rope and stomps him in the face and covers him. Like he don't understand that, a match is over. And the referee, he was like, well, okay. So he goes and counts him out. Now he's counted out both of his opponents. And then he turns and goes to Rob. and he brings Rob over into the ring and throws him in the ropes, kicks him in the belly, does the same thing to him, stomps him in the face, and covers him. And the referee's like, no, you can't cover your own partner, you know. It's just, so he gets up off of him, and now he's got nobody to stomp. They come in the ring, and they bring him a check. He's won the 2-ring battle royal, and they give him the check. And this is the part that freaked me the most. I never saw anyone introduced and get over in one day like this guy got over. They bring him the check, and he takes the check, he puts it in his mouth and eats it. He actually chews it up and swallows it, sticks his tongue out to show that it's all gone, and then he storms around and stomps them all again, bang, bang, bang. Then trying to get him out of the ring, they start to the dressing room, and the crowd kind of rushes down there like, I don't want to get close to this guy. I just want to see him. And he just panics them all. He runs straight at the crowd. They all disperse. They're all screaming and falling over each other. I'm in the back of the building in the old Coliseum, and I'm just like, wow. I've never seen anything like this. And I end up probably wrestling him in the next 2 years, probably 200 times. And he was just a phenomenal athlete, driver and a digger in the ring, never blew up. I remember having matches with him in which we would get out of control and we would start fighting, and they would come from the dressing room. I wasn't going to quit and he wasn't going to quit, and they would start trying to pull us apart. And sometimes that pull apart would last for 5 or 10 minutes, it seemed like, and he would just, I would think he's got to be gone. He's got to be exhausted. And he never, his tank never got empty. He was just burning, grinding, and digging. A phenomenal athlete, a true experience of wrestling against that guy. It was a phenomenal experience every time. It made a better wrestler out of me by his being there. And someday, Tony, we'll get a chance to talk about where he came from, Stu Hart. There's a story there about Stu Hart and that Hart family, and how he took Archie Goldie was his name, how he took a guy named Archie Goldie and made this monster out of him. It's really, truly a great story in itself. But I would have to say answer to that question is undoubtedly the Mongolian Stomper.
And by the way, Archie lived here, lived in Knoxville, became a fixture in our community, a revered member of our community, Ron, and all the way till his latter years was in tremendous shape. For his age, Ron, a guy you would not want to mess with, even in his latter years.
Oh, and you know, Tony, I don't know if you realized how old he was. I remember one time asking him, and I was 35 years old, and I thought he was 40, 45. And he said, I'm 60 years old. I could not believe it. I said, you're telling me crap. I said, there is no way you're 60 years old. He looked like he was 35 years old. He was 60 years old. I took my sons one time to the gym there in Knoxville. It's one of those big gyms. It was down there off of North Shore. And we went into the gym to work out, and I like to take them in and work out. And Stomper was upstairs, and he was on a stair-step machine. And they looked up there and they saw him and they said, Dad, that's Stomper up top there, you know. And I said, yeah, I saw him up there. And he was sweating like crazy. We started working out. We worked out for 45 minutes to an hour. And Stomper was on there already sweating. And when we left 45 minutes later, he was still on there and still sweating. And my boys were so impressed. They said, God, Dad, how does anybody do that? How does anybody have the stamina to do a machine like that for an hour and a half? And, you know, phenomenal shape, a tremendous athlete, an honor to have met him, an honor to have him work for me and to work with me. I loved him. He had a lot of heart, and a lot of that came from old Stu Hart.
The man lived from November 22nd, 1936 to January 23 of 2016. And I would venture to say that up until his latter years, if he wanted to, he probably could have gotten the ring and still gone. And the guy was close to 80 years old.
Could have, definitely, undoubtedly. And I think from what my understanding, his problem was not with his health, it was with his mind.
Correct.
His health never gave up. His health never failed him. It was his mind that failed him. And that's what happens with a lot of people with Alzheimer's and all with that type of dementia. It's a lot of wrestlers that get that problem, and it has nothing to do with their body. Bob Armstrong, if you look at that, Bob Armstrong is still kicking. He's still out there doing it. And he's almost 80 years old, and he's in the ring still, because he is in such phenomenal shape, has been all his life, and he's lucky he's kept his faculties about him. His mind is still good. He's like the Stomper. He's a great athlete, a superb individual in his health. It's a wonderful deal. It's a wonderful deal to see guys like that and to be able to compete against them and to go in the ring with them.
Hey, Stud, it's time to close us down today. Who's the winner in episode 12 of your question of the week?
Well, that last question was really good, but I like the first question about the brother teams. I think that's a topic we've never got on before. We've never touched that before. That's a really good thought process there. What's the difference between a family team and the two guys you just put together? It's just a tremendous question. That's a fabulous one, and I believe we're going to go with the brother team.
So congratulations to Roger O'Neill from Baker, Florida. Stud will soon be getting in touch with you, and you will no doubt be receiving your prize pack. Speaking of prize pack, Stud, over at your website, there are some prizes to behold. Share it with us.
Yeah, we've got a lot of things cranking up. We've wanted to put quality items on there. We've got some photographs on there now. Some are new that people have never had the opportunity to buy before. We've also packaging up some Studcast. We have thought about it, and it makes sense that there are some people out there that aren't internet savvy, and we want to get them the opportunity to ride down the road. We're selling Studcast 1 through 5 that you can buy and keep them forever. They become a part of your family. You can pass them down. You can give them to your relatives to listen to. You can ride down the road and take vacation and listen to 5 episodes back to back if you like. I think that's a great item. It gives people an opportunity that don't have that internet presence and they don't know much about the internet to be able to get these Studcasts. And I want everybody that wants to hear it to have that opportunity. That's a nice prize. We're doing T-shirts. We're doing some cartoon T-shirts. It's a great product. I love the work that goes into this. Is really, really beautiful. It's different. We've got a video. We'll be soon having a video we're going to release. It's going to be a video of mine that includes matches back into the early 70s when I'm a really young guy and just getting started down in the Tampa area. So there's a lot of things cranking up and going on sale there in the stud store. So you get on there, you go to TennesseeStud.com, and you can find the stud store. Be sure and visit it. Love to send you some stuff out. We'll get it to you right away. Really happy about that. We've got a lot of things going on, Tony. It's just wonderful what's happening. I just want to thank people again and again. I can't say enough about how fabulous this response is. It's overwhelming. It's humbling to me to just think that these people would care about what I have to say and think I'm doing a fairly good job, and you're keeping me in that chronological order. We're not going too fast, hopefully. We're not going too slow. I love the comments. Please go to Instagram, and I'm on Twitter, and that's at Ron Fuller Welch on both of those sites. You follow me. We do a lot of stuff with Instagram and with Twitter. Obviously, Facebook, I have 2 sites there because I've grown to such magnitude there. I have the Ron Fuller Welch site. You can leave questions for me like the ones we just answered, or you can go to Ron Fuller Tennessee Stud. Either one of those 2. You can like me on Ron Fuller Tennessee Stud. We can communicate back and forth there. It's just a process here that's just overwhelming to me. I just didn't expect that we would reach this plateaus that we're reaching as fast as we are. Numbers are phenomenal. People saying these compliments, these critics. I see stuff from critics that listen to podcasts and they go, this story is a must listen. It's no one does it. No one does this type of stuff on a wrestling podcast except for us. We do something that's totally unique in the wrestling business now, in the wrestling industry, and in the podcast industry. And it's beginning to really put up some huge numbers. People are really taking notice of what we're doing.
Bow your head, the great Tennessee Stud, as we've concluded another edition here. I do want to say on the way out, if you appreciate the conversation here, I make my living talking sports. You can find me at tonybasilio.com. Also, Sunday nights across the Southeast. Check us out on Facebook Live, also on Periscope. Look for us, 7 to 9 Eastern Time, Southeastern Sundays. We celebrate the sport of college football and do that each week with you. And you can also find me at tonybasilio.com, where you'll find my daily show, and we have some fun there, talking about the world of sports. In the meantime, for the great Ron Fuller, who, again, you can find on Facebook at Ron Fuller Welch, also at tnstud.com. This is Tony Basilio reminding you that when we come back, we're going to pick it up. Episode 13, it'll be time for the Family Feud. Where's Richard Dawson when you need him? Because it will be time for the Family Feud. For the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller, Tony Basilio, wishing you a great one. And thanks for joining us for another award-winning Studcast.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the great Smoky Mountains.